The NDP in Alberta just had an ethics commissioner complaint just blow right up in their faces. Today, I'll show you the commissioner's findings that the NDP don't want you to see. The Alberta Ethics Commissioner just tossed out an NDP complaint about UCP leader Jason Kenney's September trip to India. Premier Rachel Notley called Jason Kenney's trip to India one where he talked about trade, about Alberta agricultural products, and about Canadian oil and gas, quote unquote, amusing. But I don't think the NDP really thought that trip was all that funny. In fact, based on this frivolous ethics complaint they filed about it, it sounds like they were pretty threatened by the trip and very desperate to have it turn out poorly for Jason Kenney and UCP energy critic Prasad Panda, who tagged along on the trip. Now let me give you the gist of the NDP's complaint, and then let me show you how the NDP set fire to their own hair with this ridiculous, reaching, and desperate move. The NDP caucus chair, Heather Sweet, she didn't like Jason Kenney's 6-day trip to India. She didn't like that Prasad Panda and Kenney visited an oil refinery that Panda had once helped build. You see, before politics, unlike much of the NDP caucus, Panda had a real life with a real job. He's an engineer, and according to his public disclosure statement, Panda owns some shares in Reliance Industries. Now, that's the owner of the massive Indian oil refinery that he and Kenney visited. While they were in India, Kenney tweeted about visiting the oil refinery like politicians tend to do when they visit literally anything. A politician could attend the opening of an envelope and they would still tweet about it as though it were the most incredible envelope that's ever been opened on the face of the earth. But really, all kidding aside, Kenney just dished out generic facts about the oil refinery. This is the offending tweet. Fascinating to visit the world's largest oil refinery at Reliance's enormous plant at Jamnagar, Gujarat. They process nearly 2 million barrels per day, processing 2% of the world's gasoline. Feedstock comes from the Middle East, US, Mexico, Venezuela, not Canada. Heather Sweet thought that innocuous tweet somehow violated the Conflict of Interest Act. She thought it was a promotion that could have inflated Prasad Panda's share prices in the company. So Heather Sweet took to her Facebook to say she was filing an ethics commissioner complaint before she had ever actually filed one with the commissioner. You see, it's really important for the NDP to whip up the internet mob into some sort of feeding frenzy before they actually take the time to find out what the facts really are. Sweet wrote in her complaint, given that this is a secure location and required private plane travel, some arrangements were required. Did Mr. Panda use his connections to facilitate this visit to further his own private interests? Does the amount of publicity Mr. Kenney has given this particular facility, both online and in radio interviews, constitute an increase in publicity and awareness? Does this provide a benefit to the company and therefore a benefit to Mr. Panda? Oh, but friends, it did not go the way the NDP hoped it would go. This conclusion to the Ethics Commissioner's report on Sweet's complaint is like no report I have ever seen before. It reads, there were no breaches of the Conflicts of Interest Act by Member Kenney or Member Panda. They were careful about not breaching the act and being forthright throughout. They sought and received prior approval for non-commercial air travel. However, I can understand why Member Sweet possibly could have had some concerns about the trip as she was unaware of the circumstances. Let's just stop right there for a second. We need to remember this point. Heather Sweet was unaware of the circumstances of the trip, but that doesn't mean that nobody else in the NDP government was clueless. We'll get back to this point in a second. Just keep it in your mind. The commissioner's report goes on. In the future, it would be appreciated if those requesting an investigation did not post the request to social media before I have had the courtesy of receiving the request. As well, given that Alberta is having a general election within the next year, I want to make it clear that I do not want members filing complaints against other members for the purpose of scoring political points. Holy moly. Well, it's pretty clear that Marguerite Tressler, Alberta's ethics commissioner, saw right through this gutter garbage complaint from Heather Sweet. Heather Sweet has just been seriously admonished for wasting the ethics commissioner's time for pure political gamesmanship. If Heather Sweet has any shame at all, she'd be seriously embarrassed over this massive misstep. The commissioner's findings say that not only did Prasad Panda and Jason Kenney do nothing wrong, but they went out of their way to meticulously do everything right, including updating the Premier and the NDP Minister of Economic Development and Trade about everything they were doing while in India. And that's the part that I wanted to come back to. That last part there is how Heather Sweet just got hung out to dry by her very own party. Sweet sent the complaint about Kenney and Panda to the ethics commissioner. And of course, Rachel Notley had to know that she was going to do that. But according to the ethics commissioner, Heather Sweet was quote unquote unaware of the circumstances of the trip. Those are the circumstances of the very same trip that Jason Kenney informed Premier Rachel Notley about, meaning Notley and Darren Billis, the Economic Development and Trade Minister, just let Heather Sweet publicly embarrass herself with this complaint that they both knew would go nowhere. I almost feel bad for Heather Sweet, almost. Here's what the ethics commissioner found about the NDP's conspiratorial speculations that Prasad Panda was a co-owner of sorts in the Reliance refinery and that he was somehow using his sway as this deep-pocketed investor in an Indian mega refinery to not only get favors from the refinery company like private air travel, but to somehow use this trip in his capacity as the energy critic to inflate his share prices by having Kenney promote the refinery. Panda's holdings are infinitesimal. Kenney's comments were directed to Albertans and would not in any way make a difference to the share value of the company. As in, Panda's shares are barely negligible, but leave it to the NDP to not understand how shares and stock holdings work. Oh, and about the private air travel to get into the Reliance refinery, there's only one way in and one way out, and it is by private helicopter. That's it. Strangely enough, Premier Rachel Notley had very little to say about Justin Trudeau's disastrous, flamboyant, costume and faux pas-riddled trip to India, where Trudeau was snubbed by the Indian Prime Minister. But Notley called Jason Kenney's relationship-restoring trip to India something she would now have to do serious damage control to deal with. That's Jason Kenney's successful, grown-up, tactful trip to India. The trip the ethics commissioner found Jason Kenney had been invited to take at the behest of the Indian Prime Minister, a man Kenney has known for 12 years. Again, that's the same Indian Prime Minister that snubbed our juvenile Prime Minister when he was visiting there. Notley did say Jason Kenney's trip to India was amusing, but I guess the question remains, who's laughing now? For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. Hey, did you know that the Rebel Media has a new mobile app? It's available on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Download it, give it a try, and take the other side of the story with you wherever you go.